The Mindful Medic podcast is proudly sponsored by the Medical Benevolent Association of New South Wales, ACT. The MBA is an independent charity that has been supporting doctors in New South Wales and the ACT since 1896. They provide specialised counselling, information, referral and financial assistance to doctors and their families during times of adversity or hardship. Their aim is to provide non-judgmental support so that the doctor or family member recovers their well-being and independence and, wherever possible, returns to their vocation. Their services are free, specialised and no referral is necessary. All contact is kept strictly confidential and they are independent of any regulatory body. Welcome back to the Mindful Medic podcast. I am your host, Cheryl Martin. For those of you tuning in for the first time, I'm an emergency physician, a yoga teacher, an avid trail runner and eternal student. This podcast explores broader paradigms of health, well-being and what it means to perform at our best. And my guests are experts in their respective fields, but are also game changers. I feel they move us forward and, as Wayne Gretzky would say, take us to where the puck will be. I hope you enjoy this episode. So how are you all? Here we are, it's series 2, and I have to admit it's been a bit of a stuttering start. So I've been listening to Brené Brown's new podcast, Unlocking Us. And if you're not familiar with Brené's work, I do recommend checking her out. If you do a Google search, I'm sure you'll come across a few of her TED Talks. Otherwise, if you can get hold of her books, I recommend reading them. I've certainly enjoyed. And she's particularly strong when talking about areas of leadership and vulnerability. And she has also just launched the second series of her much more polished podcast. And the first episode describes this idea of day 2. And I hadn't really been familiar with the specific terminology, but I am familiar with the concept. And I think it comes from this idea, you have for example, in business, if you have a conference or a seminar, and for example, it might be 3 days, that day in the middle is usually the most difficult. And that's probably for a number of reasons. We might approach something with or without enthusiasm, but certainly with preconceived ideas, expertise, and expectations of how things might play out. And we might find that is not the case, that the way we predicted the script would run, it is quite different. And therefore we are challenged. And we have to front up on day 2 and sit with maybe discomfort and sit with the challenge. And she describes that as the messy middle. And I think then goes on to describe that as a pretty apt metaphor for where we find ourselves in the world right now. We are deep in the messy middle, midst of a pandemic, the midst of a recession, the midst of hopefully a revolution of social justice and equity. And where do we go from here? And fortunately, Brené tells us that, the middle is messy, but it's probably also where the magic is. And that if we can persevere and if we can come through this, then things might well be brighter on the other side. At least that's what I think she's alluding to, and that's where my hopes align. So I've also been reading a book called Breath by James Nestor, and I've had a long held interest in the art and science of our breath. And I really like that Nestor approaches the breath as a layman, he's not a scientist, he's not a doctor, and he really immerses himself in practice. And I think today's guest will appreciate the fact that he does look for proof in the practice. So I'm now going to introduce today's guest, because I can't think of a better person to marry both of those concepts of challenge, of struggle, and of the power of our breath. So I hope you enjoy today's episode.
Absolutely. And it really, it's free. And as long as you're breathing, you're in with a chance. Yeah. You're breathing, you're alive. You can practice pranayama. You can.
So that was Dominique Salerno, who I am delighted to welcome to the podcast today. Dominique is a yoga teacher, and she is the principal yoga teacher of the Australian Yoga Academy in Melbourne, which she co-founded with her partner in business and in life, Anthony. She is a teacher of many yoga students across the country, and she is a teacher of teachers. She has studied extensively in this field. She also holds bachelor and postgraduate qualifications in communication and counselling, and I think that will be pretty apparent listening to her articulate discourse today. She has trained both here and internationally in India, Thailand and Taiwan, and she herself says she's had opportunity to work and mentor with some of the world's greatest teachers. She has particular expertise in advanced pranayama, which we'll talk about, and Ayurvedic medicine. And I really hope to tap into some of those areas and that expertise both today and in a future episode. In her bio, Dominique says that she believes yoga is a tool for developing human potential. More importantly than that, Dominique is my yoga teacher and mentor. I really did my due diligence looking for a studio to do my teacher training after 20 years of practicing. And I like the way that Dominique and Melanie really marry the ancient wisdom with modern science and really look deeper into the practical and scientific application of this ancient practice. So there are many areas that we could talk about, but today we're going to focus on yoga in times of challenge, in the messy middle, and also the power and potential of our breath. I hope you enjoy the episode. But before we launch into that, I thought we could just go back a step further and just talk about what yoga is, which maybe the definition of yoga might be slightly different to different people, and not everybody here has a yoga practice, or shall we say, might even have some misconceptions about what yoga is, that you might need to be wearing Lululemon pants and thin and bendy and on an Instagrammable beach. And I think it is this ancient practice, but it's moved with modern times, and that's probably the modern day conception. I mean, for me personally, and I've spoken about this on the podcast, it's this idea of a tool for self-regulation, self-calibration. Certainly there's physical movement in it, but I don't do yoga for physical exercise per se. It's probably more for that idea of regulation. I mean, I know I'll get you to go in and correct me, but from the Sanskrit origins of the word yuj, yoke, union. And for me, it's that idea of union of body and mind through breath. So what is your working definition of yoga?
I feel like that's something, Cheryl, and thank you again for having me on. I'm really honoured to be asked. You know how much I love and respect you. My working definition of yoga, I feel, is constantly moving and changing. And as you said, really the root of that Sanskrit yuj, to yoke, to join, to bring together. And Patanjali defines the state of yoga. So really I like to think that yoga is not really something that we can practice, but rather it's that state that we attain when mind, body, spirit, however you want to label that trilogy of human experience, when those three things are all aligned. And Patanjali goes a little bit further and defines the state of yoga as a cessation of the fluctuations of consciousness, and really that's when we feel stressed, when we feel not quite right, when we're splintered, when we're not aligned, and when our consciousness, whether that is the mind as an aspect of consciousness or emotions as an aspect of consciousness, and you know what, even our biochemistry as an aspect of consciousness. I'm really keen to talk to you about the role of yoga in self-regulation and biochemistry. But whenever we are not aligned and splintered, or when we're bouncing from one extreme to the other, then we're not in that state of yoga. And so that state of yoga is also, for me anyway, I'm nowhere near an enlightened master. I practice yoga to stay out of prison. Yeah. I am that is not my path. I don't see necessarily as an outcome for me this lifetime anyway.
That's what I love about you, though, Dominique. You make this accessible, you make it human, you just bring that added dimension that's so important. And that's certainly what brings me to your classes time and time again.
Thank you. So you said there's that aspect, but I also, just to finish answering your question properly, as a working definition of yoga, whenever anyone asks me, this is something that doesn't change. Whenever someone asks me that question, to me, yoga is relationship. How are you relating to yourself? How is your relationship with yourself? And one of my most revered, most respected teachers, Om Prakash Tiwari from the Kaivalyananda Institute, who's my pranayama teacher and one of my Ayurvedic teachers, he has a beautiful working definition of the state of yoga. And he says yoga is integration of the personality. So when we, coming back to yoga as relationship, when we've integrated our personality, when we've found some semblance of peace in our relationship to ourselves, then we are able to exert that broader influence and have more of a peaceful influence in our immediate relationships, to our family, tribe, whatever that is to people, whether your tribe is your biological tribe or a tribe that you've established. And then, that third sphere, that broader community or world peace that everyone, loves to talk about, but is never going to happen, because it's that broader piece is the result of how each individual is carrying themselves, if you like.
Yeah, so as you're speaking there's a couple of things that come to mind, but I'm particularly thinking of practicing with you. You have a couple of beautiful classes that you do around about the time of the celebration, if I've said it right, of Guru Purnaham. And you talk about this idea of relationship with self and being our own teacher and acting first within our own locus of control, if you like, or sphere of influence.
And that's all we've got. That's all we've got. We can't control anyone else's destiny, behaviours, value systems, nor is it our place to do that. But we do and can control not what happens to us, but how we respond to what happens to us. But that takes discipline. And I think that's where the yoga as a practice really, for me anyway, comes to the fore.
And again, I was talking about you on the podcast, I think last episode or the one before, and I always hear you in my head quoting that beautiful line from Pema Chodron, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." And it's very powerful, but very challenging quote. You know, it is. The reality is we are in the storm right now, and as you have quite rightly said to me, we're not all in the same boat. And how we navigate this, and I know for you as a business owner and, you know, a prominent person in the yoga community, this has been particularly challenging. And I wonder how you're navigating that personally, and has it changed your own relationship to your practice, and to your teaching practice? I know you're only too familiar with this medium of Zoom at the moment.
It's obviously completely revolutionized and turned upside down and inside out the way that we teach. You know, we've obviously had to go from in-person classes to now being completely remote and via Zoom. So that's had its own set of challenges. As we were saying earlier on, I'm sort of looking toward the silver lining, and in a way grateful that this crisis has sort of given me a little push in that direction and forced me to become more comfortable with technology. But it's very, very different now in terms of how my practice has changed, and I think I'm pretty confident that I can say that this would be the case for a lot of other yoga practitioners out there. What this has done is really changed my practice. And you know what, Cheryl, your sadhana, your personal practice should always be changing and evolving depending on where you are in your life. So that's reminded me of that ability to morph and to, pun intended, to be flexible and willing to change to suit the circumstances. So what I've found is I've gone from my regular daily established practice of an hour and a half to now, even though we're locked down and on the outset it seems as though everyone's got more time, they don't, and I don't actually have the luxury of an hour and a half, nor do I have the mental or emotional bandwidth to sort of feel like I can sit and focus for that long. So what I've found in my own life is my practice is now in smaller bites throughout the day. So I've got a 20-minute, half an hour practice that happens first thing in the morning, preferably before the sun comes up. So I really do have that time to myself, and that's where I pop in my pranayama, my breath work and the meditation. And then the asana, if I'm lucky, I get a half an hour or a 45-minute bracket during the day. But some days it's 2 15-minute brackets or 3 10-minute brackets. And then again, I'm finding it really important to have something at night just to even just to help me detox, if you like, from the excess technology that I'm being exposed to. And to wind down at the end of the day. So, and the feedback that we've been having from our students is exactly that, that, you know, that people don't have the time, the energy or the inclination to commit to a 1 hour practice or class. They're finding it much more achievable and reasonable to be breaking their practice up into smaller portions during the day.
Perfect. And I just wanted to expand a bit about the practices that you have been teaching, particularly at this time. And I've been very fortunate to participate in the AYA online studio. And I've been really enjoying and noticing that you are, you know, favouring more grounding practices. There's been a lot of breath work, guided relaxation and yoga nidra. And just as an aside for people listening who maybe aren't familiar with yoga itself, the idea of asana. So asana is the Sanskrit term for the physical postures, which many more people will be familiar, for example, with the warrior pose, the tree pose. Those are asana in yoga. And you know that I particularly enjoy your classes because they are built and cultivated frequently round an intention, or sankalpa is the Sanskrit, so intention setting. And I noticed that you've returned a few times to this, one of the yamas, and I didn't know there was more than 5. So this is the 6th yama, as I understand it, Driti. And I'm sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Again, Scottish and Sanskrit don't really marry very well. But it seems so apt, this idea of steadfastness in the face of ever-changing circumstances. So I wanted to ask you about your inspiration for that, and if you could expand a little bit about the types of classes that you've prioritised in teaching.
Cheryl, I might take you around a little bit of a merry-go-round, as
Please
is my
do.
my style. So, first of all, your Sanskrit pronunciation is beautiful. It's perfect. Mine certainly not perfect either. So I barely manage English most of the time. But anyway, so just to help your audience who maybe aren't.
You do good Scottish, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you. We might get some later.
Yeah, mate, we laugh. Okay. So just to clarify a few things for your listeners, that word sankalpa is a Sanskrit word, and it means setting an intention or setting a tone. And I'm going to try and keep this all tied back into COVID-19 and keep it as apt as possible. And so when you are setting out for your practice, and even first thing in the morning, part of what your morning practice is setting sankalpa, setting intention, setting tone for the rest of your day. And what I've found in the last 6 months is that if you don't take the reins for setting the tone and the intention for your day, especially when the situation is so uncertain and nebulous and scary, if you don't take responsibility for setting the intention for your day, then circumstances will. And I've certainly found that to be the case with myself. Those days that I'm not disciplined and because I'm not, I don't have a perfect practice. It's that's why they call it a yoga practice and not a yoga perfect. Yeah. But those days that I don't discipline myself to get up and take the reins for the few things that I do still control, then I find myself really at the mercy of external circumstances for the rest of the day. It's actually quite shocking to me sometimes when I find myself down the reactionary path, garden path, and then I cast my mind back. Oh, okay, that's why you didn't pick up those. You didn't pick up the responsibility for that today, Dominique, so that's on you. So that's just a little bit of why I think Sankalpa is very, very important, even just as a daily, okay, what's my intention today? And coming up with a plan and sticking to it. Yeah. The yamas and niyamas, again, for those listeners of yours that aren't familiar with these words, yoga practice is divided, if you like, into 8 distinct limbs. And yama and niyama are they constitute the first 2 limbs of yoga. And I like to actually think of them as twin pillars that hold up our yoga practice. So yama and niyama are all about our relationship. There's that again, our relationship to self and our relationship to others. That word yama literally translates as restraint. And so the 5 traditional yamas that everyone knows are about having a look at becoming aware rather of the common tendencies that we have as human beings that tend to lead us in the wrong direction or tend to lead us away from that state of yoga. And then niyama are observances. So I like to think of the yamas as behavioral or habits and tendencies that need to be reined in and have us keep an eye on. And then the niyamas are deliberate observances, so behaviours and tendencies that are positive and lead us more towards that state of union with self and others that we want to deliberately tend to really carefully. Most people are only aware of 5 yamas and 5 niyamas because that's what Patanjali describes in his Yoga Sutras. But there are countless other texts in that beautiful yogic pantheon of wisdom. And I was fortunate enough, again, through my teacher, Sri O.P. Tiwari, to be exposed to the other 5 yamas. So there are 10 yamas, not just 5. the original 5 are great, but I have found in my practice since this situation, it's really sort of brought me back to some of these other philosophical precepts that I maybe didn't pay too much attention to before. So it's been another, let's say that's a gift to have come out of this situation. So there are 5 extras, and that one, Drikti, and to be honest, I'm not 100% sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly either, but Drikti, it sounds like a Christina Aguilera song circa 1996. But the Sanskrit word Drikti, the root dr means to bear, to hold up, to carry, or to persevere, to remain. And there are lots of texts that make reference to this yama, including the Bhagavad Gita and several of the Upanishads. So I really like to think of Driti as perseverance and forbearance, especially in the face of obstacles and ever-changing circumstances. It's so apt for our current situation, but it's also it also requires sankalpa. It requires intention and discipline on our part to continue to persevere, to continue to hold on, especially in this second round of lockdowns for us here in Melbourne. I think people who did the first round really well have just, they've run out of steam, run out of gas. They gave the first lockdown their all, and so we really have to discipline ourselves to get up every day and pick up that burden and to carry on and to persevere, especially, we need it especially now when we are so fatigued.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other practices that you particularly recommend or you have prioritised at the moment? I notice a few of the online classes you emphasise chest and shoulder opening and back release. So in terms of the physical practice, particularly as people are challenged by adverse ergonomics of being stooped over kitchen benches, working from home and helping their children homeschool, and that I know has been of particular benefit for a lot of people.
Well, I think good old salute to the sun. The good old salute to the sun is such a beautiful and really complete practice within itself. So helping people build their endurance and their strength, and just keeping their energy circulating is really, really important. As well as balancing postures. And it's interesting, so much of the feedback that I've had from my students at the moment is that balancing postures are really difficult for them right now. And that's understandable. It's absolutely understandable, but all the more reasons to persevere with them. And at night time, any propped inversions, so any restorative postures are just popping your legs up against the wall, maybe popping a few pillows or coffee table books, whatever you've got lying around underneath the sacrum, underneath the pelvis, to help elevate the pelvis even more, is really useful to help wind down at the end of the day. And also the most simple asanas and practices for maintaining healthy alignment of the neck. There's a beautiful practice called Brahma Mudra, which is a pranayama kriya or cleansing practice that Tuaraji would take us through every single day. And it's so perfect for us where we find ourselves right now, because what it does is actually foster almost immediate mental focus, emotional stability, and of course assisting with maintaining healthy, happy a cervical spine alignment, so alignment through the neck. And as you've said, most of us are really using a lot more technology than perhaps we otherwise would be. And so just to combat that, I'm finding this practice especially useful. There's some really amazing science now too, because of course back when I learnt this 15, 20 years ago, there wasn't the science to back it up, but we were just taking Tawari at his word that yes, this is what we do, and absolutely the proof is always going to be in the practice. But it's really exciting now to be listening to amazing experts like Dr. Andrew Huberman, based out of Stanford, explaining to us, exactly what the relationship between the eyes and the movement of the head and the neck and how that ties into our neurochemistry, and exactly why these practices work. So definitely Brahma Mudra is a fantastic one. And if people are interested in what that is, we've got a short 10-minute tutorial up on our Instagram, our AWA Instagram page, if anyone wants to.
Perfect, and I'll link into that.
Yeah, and it doesn't cost you anything. But it really is very powerful. So I suppose that's in terms of asana, those are the things that I would be focusing on. And then, of course, I'm sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but one of the amazing benefits, one of the positive things to come out of this, and the business owner in me reels as these words come out of my mouth, but the yoga teacher and the yogi in me celebrates this. Maybe this COVID-19 situation is going to have a really wonderful benefit in forcing people to really take responsibility for maintaining a home practice. Yeah. Because as much as I, pay my rent by having bodies in the room coming to class, and I love going to class with other people, nothing replaces that energy and community and shared goal. They're in a real class, but ultimately yoga practice is meant to be a very personal thing, a very unique, personally tailored, and ever-changing thing, and so maybe us being forced out of studios, and is maybe that's going to be one of the benefits to come out of this.
So great. We've covered the yamas, the niyamas, the physical postures or asana. And now I want to move on to another of the 8 limbs. So this idea of pranayama or breath work. And I know you have particular expertise in this area, and it's what we really wanted to dive into in this episode. So again, pardon my Sanskrit. So pranayama coming from the Sanskrit for prana, meaning life force or energy, referring to breath as life, and ayama, to draw out. So drawing out the energy or the life force through the breath. And, this is a topic that I know gets both of us very excited. So there's a lot of marrying of this ancient wisdom now with modern medical science, starting to really explore, well, why does this work? Why is it effective? Why can breathing be an autonomic regulator? Why can it enhance and improve our health, our well-being, and our performance? And I have to, and I may get this wrong, but it was BKS Iyengar who said this fantastic quote, the idea of the mind is the king of the senses and the breath is the king of the mind. So very powerful. And I've heard you frequently refer to in your classes the idea of the breath being the boss. So can you tell me, why is the breath the boss?
Beautiful. And Cheryl, I know that quote is often attributed to BKS Iyengar, but he was actually quoting the Yoga Pradipika.
There you go. Thank you.
I forget which verse and which chapter that's in, but that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It really
Superb.
Such an amazing quote, because the breath is the boss. The breath is the one aspect of autonomic nervous system functioning that is under our conscious control if we take responsibility for cultivating it more carefully. And no one ever takes us aside and teaches us how to breathe. Of course, when we're very, very little, small babies and toddlers, they don't have any of those poor breathing habits yet. And those poor breathing habits kick in at some stage during childhood, either because of childhood illness that maybe forces us to start breathing in and out of the mouth, or an injury that affects our primary muscles of respiration, or even a trauma or a shock can set us into what I call reverse breathing habits that just stay with us for life. And the breath is, as I said, it's our one-way ticket to accessing autonomic nervous system function, rather. Our breathing has the ability to slow the heart rate or to increase the heart rate, to flood us with positive, happy hormones, or to flood us with stress hormones. So it's just so powerful, but it's I don't know why people aren't more aware of it. So I think we're becoming more aware of this, and that makes me really, really happy and hopeful. But yeah, it's free and it doesn't cost you anything except a little bit of personal discipline, and the proof is always there in the practice. It's amazing the difference that it can make.
Yeah, so I find this very interesting. And I think it's another one of breathing itself, and breath work is another underrepresented or underrated and appreciated area in medicine, a bit like sleep that we explored in a few episodes ago. And I'm already thinking just to my work this week in the emergency department and some practical applications of pranayama, if you like. So one example, we will quite frequently see patients come in with something called supraventricular tachycardia, or SVT, which is a very rapid heart rate. And obviously we need to get that down. It's not good for you to be sitting with a heart rate for 200 for prolonged periods of time. And for that particular condition, one of the very first lines of intervention is something called vagal manoeuvres, and slow, controlled breath work is a vagal manoeuvre, as is a Valsalva, so that's also involving breath. And quite frequently we'll do that while we're preparing second line, medications, which are very unpleasant. And it's very nice to walk into the resuscitation room, and as we're getting other things prepared, to just lead a patient in a few guided breath exercises, and lo and behold, find that they revert back to a normal heart rate. So that's very satisfying. And I can think of a couple of examples. We see many shoulder dislocations. So the shoulder is one of the most commonly dislocated joints in the body, as the most mobile. And we're fighting against muscles, really, to be able to get that joint back into place and muscular tension. And there's a few techniques that involve massage and really guided progressive muscular relaxation, and breath work can be really useful in that setting. It's a bit like yoga nidra, allowing patients to focus on breath and redirect their attention, and lo and behold, relax their muscles, and then the joint just naturally wants to pop back where it's meant to be. So that's also a very nice technique. And, we are seeing more people come in with panic attacks and acute anxiety reactions. And I think it's almost essential to sit with those patients, and if you can actually get them again to engage with their breath and redirect their attention, that again initially is, that is pranayama in practice with real application. So I have now gone off on a tangent, but I wanted, I think you've already said that most of us are not probably breathing to our full potential. Why do you think that's the case?
Okay, that's a really great point to start on, Cheryl. Well, we all start off, as you said, we start off breathing fine, no problems, but something happens, and this is obviously unique to everyone, but something happens in early childhood. Usually it could be an illness or a trauma that forces us, as I said, to start mouth breathing, which is just the worst possible thing that you can do. As my teacher Tawari says, nose for breathing, mouth for eating. Or I say it could be, a trauma or a shock. But somewhere along the line, our natural, normal, healthy breathing patterns become interrupted, and then we set ourselves into a new dysfunctional habit, which normally involves breathing in and out through the mouth. So one of the most potent things that people can do to help themselves with the breathing is just start breathing through the nose. Start breathing through the nose. That's what the nose is built for. And even bringing this back to the current situation, the nose produces small amounts, but definitely produces nitrous oxide, and nitrous oxide is antiviral, is antibacterial. It's a potent vasodilator, and so breathing in and out through our nose is going to instantaneously calm us down, because it also forces us to breathe more slowly. It's a much longer path that breath has if it has to come via the sinuses than it does via the mouth. And additionally, as you well know, there are specific structures within the sinuses, those turbinates. I can never pronounce the Latin for it, so I just call them turbinates.
I don't think I know the Latin.
Concha or concha.
Oh, yes.
Yes, but I'm convinced I don't pronounce it correctly. But I also prefer the name turbinates because it reminds me exactly what these structures do.
Yes.
And that is when we're breathing in through the nose, those turbinates quite literally alter the velocity and the direction of airflow. So we end up, when we breathe through the nose, aside from breathing more slowly because we're forced to, the air is filtered, it's humidified, it's able to mix with the NO2 that's naturally produced in the sinuses, which, as I said, is antiviral, antibacterial, and vasodilating. There's also a slower perfusion of air as it moves into the lungs, and those turbinates assist the inhale to reach the back of the lungs and to move into the lower lobes of the lungs. And I think most people don't realize the majority of lung tissue is actually in the back of the lungs. So that in itself, just breathing in and out through the nose. And I often have people say to me, oh, but my nose is blocked, or I have a deviated septum, or I have this, that, or the next thing. There's this principle in anatomy and physiology, use it or lose it. And one of the best ways to be able to breathe more fully through your nose, you have to start breathing through your nose, and the sinuses will start opening up. There's a very small percentage of people with who have had legitimate trauma to the nose that may require surgical intervention for a deviated septum, but more than 95% of people that complain of not being able to breathe or have difficulty breathing in and out through the nose have a marked improvement over time when they just start using that natural gift.
Yeah, so I like that you've highlighted the importance of nasal breathing, and I find this again, another area that's very interesting. I'm not sure if I would have such a strong kind of awareness of the importance of nasal breath were it not for my yoga practice. I, for 2 decades, as I practice vinyasa yoga, so that is a form of movement through breath, I have, 99% of that practice, I'll be breathing in and out through my nose. I interestingly don't do that so much with my running, particularly when I'm running uphill. But there is some interesting work surrounding respiratory motor coupling and the use of nasal breathing in running. But I will not go down that rabbit hole because, if I talk about running, we'll never really get back on track. So you've already mentioned and alluded to, so the importance of the idea of the nose being a filter. It warms, it humidifies the air. It's got an important immune function in filtering out the viruses and the bacteria. And this idea of nitric oxide being produced and having an important role in bronchodilation and vasodilation, so opening up the small airways and the blood vessels in the lung, ultimately to improve gas exchange, which is what the function of our lungs are. And I think it's a good time to bring in conversations we've been having about a particular pranayama we're seeing in practice in medicine right now. Because we are facing a viral pathogen in this pandemic, and the primary system that it seems to be attacking is the lungs and the oxygenation and the circulation to the lungs. And there's a pranayama involving a posture, the crocodile pose or Makrasana, that I think you taught me, Dominique, which is one of my favourite practices. Is where you're lying on your stomach, comfortable position, resting head and forehead, and you're encouraging so as you breathe in, your diaphragm descends and the belly expands. So we don't breathe with our bellies, but when we're nice and relaxed and really taking full inspiration, and as the diaphragm descends, the belly will expand. So you're focusing on that expansion happening onto the ground that you're lying on, and then really redirecting the breath to the back of the body. So those areas of lung that would be dependent if you were lying on your back. And, if you have somebody with their hands on you, can feel that full inspiration. It's a bit like pumping up a tire. And I find this interesting because we are seeing a great example of pranayama in practice in medicine at the moment. And we've seen this for some time in intensive care medicine in ventilated patients, where there is a recognised practice called proning, where they will, and that's now become something that many people are now familiar with because we've made mention of it in the media. And that's where patients who are already on ventilators will be turned onto their stomach and their position changed to help recruit some of the lung areas that have been collapsed off through their illness and being dependent and gravity and plugging and many other factors. And that technique is, it's technically pretty difficult if you can imagine somebody with many tubes and wires and lines and it is fraught with challenge to be able to turn them onto their stomach. But we're now seeing at a stage of, prior to that in patients who maybe are getting sicker with COVID, that we're doing awake proning essentially, or really we're doing Makrasana. So we're asking them to turn on their bellies, on their sides, and focus on breath work there. And many of them are already on oxygen, but trying to recruit those other areas of lung. And anecdotally in some small studies that I've looked at, this seems to be successful. So I find that definitely an area to watch. I don't know if you have any commentary on that.
I'm really happy to hear that that the medical the medical fraternity have discovered this proning. And again, I'm sort of sitting here with a bit of a wry smile on my face, because this is a really exciting time to be studying and practicing yoga. Back when I started in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, there were no studies. There were no there were no books, nothing was known for certain. A lot of it was just being taken on trust. But now we know, for example, that Ujjayi, which is a breathing technique. It's also an independent pranayama, but it's the foundational technique that we use when we're practicing postures and when we're practicing pranayama. Ujjayi is CPAP. And Makrasan, crocodile pose, as you that is now being used, and I understand being used quite successfully in treating patients with COVID and a lot of respiratory issues. So that really pleases me. Because and again, being on a ventilator would. My understanding, and I'm no expert in this area, you can perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that unfortunately a lot of people who end up on ventilators don't do very well. And maybe that again is coming back to this principle of use it or lose it. If you've got a machine breathing for you, then your body's not exactly going to be signaled to work and to access that for itself. So yeah, absolutely, that practice of proning, I would be really interested to hear what comes out of it for you guys in the medical.
Yeah, and this reminds me, you lent me Stig Severinsen's book, Breathology, a couple of years ago. So he's the famous free diver. That's written a book about the art of conscious breathing. And he makes the point that, you can do breath work with frail elderly patients in their hospital bed. And, that also reminds me of the conversation I had with Nick Littlehales, who, regarding sleep, he said, you don't really get this right in hospital, do you? You've got these bright fluorescent lights, you've got lots of noise, there's little privacy, it's not really an environment conducive to sleep and to the restorative or harnessing the restorative powers of sleep in recovery. And yeah, I mean, both of these examples strike me as, there's some science to back this up, and it's not that difficult in terms of intervention. What we could do this better. In fact, we could do it so much better.
Absolutely. And it really, it's free. And as long as you're breathing, you're in with a chance. Yeah. You're breathing, you're alive. You can practice pranayama. You can, so.
I'd love if we could go on to talk about a few of the specific breathing techniques that we use in yoga and that you teach, and maybe some of the more accessible breathing exercises. I've mentioned before that one of my favourite forms of practice is vinyasa, and my understanding again from the Sanskrit, and I think this is beautiful, is that vinyasa means to place in a special way with a special breath. And I think I particularly like this because when I'm focused on how I'm moving my body in space, guided by my breath, I forget about my to-do list. So I get out of my head, which is great. And then when the physical practice gets more challenging, I'm then doubly focused on breath. And I find that, again, that can be a useful distraction from any of the discomfort and challenge. And I mean, if we've said before, if practice is a metaphor for life and the real yoga happens off the mat, you can see why all of this is useful. And the special breath in vinyasa is something called Ujjayi, victorious breath, again, very apt. I would love if you could, there'll be people listening who are maybe not familiar with Ujjayi, if you could break that down, and then we'll go on to talk about a few of the other more accessible breathing exercises.
Beautiful. Okay. So the Ujjayi is, as I said, it's the technique that we use during asana practice, but it's also the fundamental technique that we use for most of the pranayama practices. So I actually like to remind myself that ujjayi is not negotiable. And that ujjayi is actually the ground substance that forms our practice. It's the soil, the earth that our practice grows from. It's absolutely fundamental. And what the ujjayi does is it involves a very gentle constriction of the glottis, and the feeling is, and the action in the throat is exactly the same as if you were fogging up a pane of glass. Yes. So what it does in conjunction with the nasal breath, because ujjayi is always a nasal breath as well. So there's all the benefits of breathing through the nose, which are, innumerable and just so life affirming. But the ujjayi then also, it acts as a secondary sort of slowing mechanism. The ujjayi also lends texture and form and sound, because there's a very definite sound and a very definite feeling or texture that comes into the breath when you're using ujjayi. So I like to think of that sound and the texture of my ujjayi. It's my friend on the mat. It's my own personal soundtrack. So it's lending form to something that's ordinarily formless. In order to practice ujjayi, you have to be focused on what you're doing. So again, it's a great anchor for the awareness, and the feeling and the sound of the ujjayi can also act as a barometer for you on the mat. So what I mean by that is, when I'm practicing, if I notice that my breath starts to become very strained or shallow, or that ujjayi sound or feeling drops away, then I know I've maybe pushed myself too hard, or taken myself into a shape or a variation of a shape that is not appropriate for me that day. Because if you can't breathe in a shape, and I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but just to ujjayi as it applies to asana, the state of asana is a balance between stability, stiram, and easefulness, sukham. Yeah. And there is no ease without stability. And gee, that's something that's really sort of, again, this pandemic has shown me more than ever. If you don't have any stability in any aspect of your life, then there's no opportunity for easefulness. So tying that back into the ujjayi, when I'm practicing, it's a really lovely, as I say, barometer to let me know if the stability is not there.
So you mentioned when we were preparing for this episode that you think there are much more relevant and accessible and simple breathing exercises that we could all benefit from at this time in particular. And I watched the great short video that you prepared on a breathing technique for the AYE studio yesterday, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Encourage everyone to have a look, and more importantly, practice. As you said, the proof is in the practice. So this idea of the SOS breath, can you explain a bit about the rationale for that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was alluding to. And the other reason I really like it, Cheryl, is that it doesn't have any fancy Sanskrit names. Yeah. It's actually a modern, I learnt about it through the work of Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he refers to it as a physiological sigh, and it's something that we all do innately when we're stressed. I call it my sigh or die reflex, especially since becoming a mum. You know, if I don't stop and take an emergency breath or sigh, then something is going to befall you when my little one's busting my chops. So, and I love it because you only need 2 or 3 minutes. You can even do it mid-conversation because it's not so apparent that you are performing some complicated yogic breathing technique. It's a natural inclination, a natural reflex that everyone has. And so this technique just helps you to tap into that right away, and it works instantaneously. It balances the levels of CO2 and O2 in the bloodstream, and it also helps to just re-establish good pressure within the lungs, in the alveoli. So in my mind, as you know, Cheryl, anatomy and physiology, not my my wheelhouse. I do my best though, but my understanding is that when you practice this technique, it actually helps to, as I say, repressurize, to puff up the alveoli in the lungs, and balance out. It helps you just to blow off any excess CO2 that you might have floating around. And anyone with animals, especially dogs and small children, you've probably seen them do this just before they settle down for a sleep. It's so instantaneously relaxing. And there was one other breathing technique that, you know, we were talking about what people can be doing to help themselves right now. And another fantastic breathing technique is called Samhavritti, but your listeners might actually know this as box breathing. That's what box breathing is. So Samha is where we get our English word same. There are so many English words that actually come to us straight from the Sanskrit, and vritti means movement or churning or turning. So samavritti is an equilibrated or same length of breath movements, and there are two different expressions of samhavritti. I call this one Samavritti 1, which is just the easiest one, which is an equilibrated inhalation and exhalation with a specific count. So if people are very auditory, they can, you know, just hear themselves counting, or if you're very visual, you can see the numbers in your mind's eye. But counting from 1 to 4 as you inhale, and counting backwards from 4 to 1 as you exhale. If you're more comfortable, if you're more comfortable with breath work, you can of course stretch that out as much as you want. Or if that 4 count is too much or causes too much discomfort, tension, or oxygen hunger, you can break it, cut it down by 1 or 2 counts if you like. But that's Samavritti 1. It's just a simple equilibrated inhale and exhale. And then that box breathing, which is used by the US Marines and Navy SEALs to help them maintain composure in really stressful situations. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. I've called it Samhavritti 2, but really this is just box breathing, and that's where we take it out into a 4-phase breath, where we, for example, inhale for the count of 4, then we retain that inhalation for 4 counts, then exhale for the count of 4, and then retain the exhalation for 4 counts. So that's where they get that box or 4-cornered breath work idea from. And that is just so easy, so potent, and 5 to 10 minutes of box breathing can really just shift you from a state of incredible stress and tension and feeling like you're not able to cope to a very different space. It's not, none of this is going to miraculously remove any of the difficulties that we find ourselves facing right now. But what these techniques and what the yoga practice and mindful breathing will do is help us to navigate these waters more gracefully.
Yeah, so true. And for anyone now listening and whose interest is piqued, where would you advise them to start if they were thinking about incorporating some brief conscious breathing practices into their day?
Well, I'd advise them to start with this emergency breath, which I can talk you through.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
It's so easy, and it really is a lifesaver. And so all you do is take in a regular inhalation. And then right at the top of that inhale, there'll be a little bit of tidal volume, a little bit of space left in the lungs. So you take in your normal inhale, and then right at the top of that inhale, you take in an extra sip of air to really fill the lungs to capacity, let's say. And then it's a very slow exhalation. So if you were in pranayama, we tend to write things out as ratios. It's our sort of breath work practice shorthand. So if you were to write this out as a ratio, it would look something along the lines of 2, 1, 4. So the 2 indicates that regular inhale, the 1 denotes that little short top up of inhale, if you like, and then that number 4 tells you just how slow the exhale needs to be relative to the 2 inhalations that you've done. It's always preferable to breathe through the nose, as we said, if possible, but you can inhale through the mouth for this if you like, but exhale through the nose. When in doubt, nose breathe whenever possible. And that's it. You just do 5 to 7 rounds of that, and the proof is in the practice.
Yeah, I like that.
We know that yoga has stood the test of time over thousands and thousands of years. We now fortunately have the scientific data to back this up, but no amount of data or history replaces the practice and just seeing for yourself.
And that just takes me back to the very first, I suppose, experience I had of yoga. I have no idea what I did in the class, but I remember, I think I was 18, and I remember it was the way I felt when I came out. I mean, I don't know what your first experience was. Can you tell me?
I remember it vividly. I encountered my first ever yoga practice when I was at university back in 1995. And I remember coming home, and Anthony, my now husband, was my flatmate at the time. And I remember going home and just feeling amazing. And he looked at me strangely. Clean. I feel clean. I feel like my cells have had a bath. I didn't have the language, to describe it, but I knew that this was something special.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful for that first chance encounter at the university gym.
Yeah, and I know you see all the time that people might initially come to your classes to move their body, and undoubtedly there's benefits from practicing the physical postures. But I suspect that for many of them, it's not the only reason that they keep coming back to their practice and to the class.
And look, there's nothing wrong. Yoga. We started off this podcast talking about what yoga is, and yoga is different things to different people. As I said, I use it to keep me out of the out of prison, and other people use it for the ultimate aim of enlightenment. And there's nothing wrong if you're using your yoga practice primarily as a vehicle for physical conditioning. That's great, that's wonderful, but that's only going to get you so far. And hopefully you will encounter along the way an asana teacher or a yoga teacher that is able to sneakily start to introduce some of these broader ideas, the philosophy, the breath work into it, so that that practice evolves.
Yeah, and this is the point in the conversation where I am again grateful that I've met a teacher like you on my yoga journey who embodies all of those qualities that you have just described. So thank you, Dominique. And thank you for sharing your time here today. I like to finish and wind down the episodes with a few more personally directed questions. And I know that you'll approach this first one with your yogi and your Ayurvedic hat on, but what does good health mean to you?
Resilience and adaptability. In yoga and Ayurveda, we don't define health as an absence of physical symptoms. It's actually primarily mentally and emotionally. How is the person? Because it's the view of Ayurveda and yoga that our physical well-being is the result of what's happening at those psychological and emotional and biochemical levels. So. And maybe this is just something right now that's at the forefront of my mind because of the time we find ourselves in. But yeah, definitely that resilience. So, and I'm sure that the majority of your audience are more sort of the medically minded. So just to tie this back in to look at it through that lens, if you like, this idea of resilience and yoga practice is there's a great misunderstanding out there that yoga practice is all about relaxing and all about stoking the parasympathetic and all about being in that very soft, open, receptive state. And it's not. True resilience is not true resilience isn't our ability to stay calm all the time. True resilience, in my understanding, is our ability to toggle between states of stress and states of relaxation, and that's where, again, this practice comes into the fore. So even an asana practice, the physical postures, there are some lovely grounding, relaxing poses, but asana is difficult. Asana is stressful, and it's deliberately.
And there's so many layers. You said there's never, the pose is never finished. That's my favorite Dominique quote as well.
Just when you think you've mastered a shape, there's a whole nother layer of subtle awareness waiting to knock you off your perch. So yeah, and just to use asana as an example, asana deliberately stresses us, deliberately strains us in a controlled environment. So I like to think of the mat as a little petri dish that we conduct experiments on and do some training on, so that we can then take that with us, which is the idea. Yeah. So the yoga is not what happens on the mat; it's what happens off the mat. But the mat is a proving ground and a training ground and a tool to help us focus and hone those skills to help us when we're off the mat. So I think it's really important that people divest themselves of this idea that that yoga is about being all peaceful and all calm all the time. It's not. That's not what life is.
Yeah.
Life is a 50-50 proposition. But are you healthy? So coming back to finally answer your question, true health and well-being is your ability not to run away from stress and stick your head in the sand, because that's not what this life is about, but it's your ability to face stress, to face the world head on. But can you toggle between the two? Are you able to expose yourself, or not even expose yourself? Are you able to ride those stressful waves that you will inevitably encounter during your day? Can you then discipline yourself to relax down effectively after that? And to me, that's what true resilience is. And certainly what true health and true well-being is all about, especially during these times. And Cheryl, I'm thankful that you're gifted at the editing, because I just wanted to come back and
please.
Something really important that you asked me before about people's personal practice and starting a personal practice and what are good things to do, and tying this back in again to sankalpa. The best possible thing that people can do right now in their life, in their personal practice, in my humble opinion, from a yogic perspective, is to establish intention in their day, establish sankalpa in their day, take responsibility for navigating the very shallow patch of water that you are in control of right now, which is what you do with your day and your time, and then to participate in short, doable, short, achievable practices that suit you. I think, as I said, salute to the sun is a wonderful practice just to build strength, stability, and flexibility. Working with some very, very simple breath work like that Makrasan, which, by the way, for your listeners, is simply lying on your belly with your hands stacked one on top of the other and the forehead resting on top of the hands, making sure that there's no tension in the chest or shoulders. So you may need to slide the hands up or down depending on the structure of your neck and shoulders. And then making sure that your feet, I like to have the big toes turned in and the heels turned out so that there's no compression around my sacrum or lower back. So that's the standard prone position. And from there, the breath work that we engage in is smooth, steady ujjayi, inhalations and exhalations. Now, if your listeners have no idea about the ujjayi as yet, just breathe in and out through the nose. We can get to the ujjayi another time. But to really feel, as you're lying on the floor, we're using the surface beneath us, using the floor underneath us as a reference point. So the idea is that when we inhale in Makrasana practice, we're really trying to actively expand the belly against the resistance of the floor to help us connect with those primary muscles of respiration and engage a true diaphragmatic breath. And not only is the belly expanding against the resistance of the floor, but we're also encouraging, as you indicated earlier, the side ribs and the back ribs. We're also really encouraging that part of the thorax to be involved in the breath. And so there's very real sort of anatomical and physiological benefits to that, but psychologically and emotionally coordinating all of that forces us to come into the present moment. You can't be obsessing about your emails or how your partner pissed you off over the breakfast table whilst you're participating in these practices. So I just wanted to make sure that I covered that off for you.
Yeah, perfect.
And if you were to design an ideal day, including lots of self-care for yourself, what would it look like?
I think a good day starts the night before. And I don't mean to sound, trite or Pollyanna-esque at all,
No,
but this
nice.
is true for me. The way that my day is often starts the night before. So getting organized the night before and, having all my clothes laid out. And, for me, I have to sneak a lot of my practice happens quite early in the morning. So I have to have everything prepared and laid out so I don't wake up the household. Things like not eating a meal that's too heavy too late at night, because that interrupts our sleep, and then waking up with a plan and setting that intention, and really, really committing to that every day. I think it's absolutely essential that people get outside and expose themselves to the brightest natural light that they possibly can prior to 8 a.m. This is, again, I just want to give credit where credit's due. Thousands and thousands of years of yoga tradition tells us that we need to expose ourselves to the rising sun. And now modern science and the work of Andrew Huberman, now we understand why. Yep, all we need is 5 to 10 minutes of natural light exposure, so sunglasses off, first thing in the morning. That's going to set our melatonin release for later on in the day. So wake up, get prepared the night before, wake up, start with intention, make sure you get outside, expose yourself to some sunlight. And for me, I think it's important that people start their day with mindful movement. Salute to the sun is perfect for me, not only sort of physically, but I find mentally and emotionally there's a lot of really life-affirming ideas in that practice, and it's just my habit. But for anyone else, you just a nice walk, just a nice mindful walk, no AirPods, no technology, no noise, is certainly very helpful. But what's perfect for me and what's right for me is not going to be what's perfect or right for anyone else. So I'd love to be able to answer your question.
No, it's okay. I was meaning it directed to you personally.
Okay, sorry. So I'll come back and answer it from my perspective. So in an ideal world, I would be waking up just before the sunrise and practicing my pranayama, asana, and then meditation. If I'm feeling especially stiff or sore or sorry for myself, I need to do the asana first, because that physically that sort of opens me up and assists the breath work. So sometimes that varies, and I do find that for me personally, it has to happen first thing in the morning, otherwise it doesn't happen. And then to continue answering your questions in a post-COVID world, I'm looking at this now. It's BC and AC. But in an AC world where things have opened up again, nothing replaces the energy of a class. And even if I do, when I do practice asana myself first thing in the morning, I'll think nothing of having a second asana practice, and getting along to enjoy someone else's teaching and let myself be a student, which is that's something I miss. Yeah. And then at night, we spoke really briefly about light exposure first thing in the morning. It's also important that people have light exposure after 3 p.m. Because that again is signaling the nervous system about our circadian rhythms, and light exposure past 3 p.m. is setting up then the release of cortisol that's going to wake us up in the morning. So there's this beautiful relationship between the rising sun and the setting sun and our own internal chemistry. So definitely, if possible, get outside in the afternoon, and spend 5 minutes with your sunglasses off, just taking in, I'm not advocating staring into the sun, of course, but exposing yourself to natural light in the afternoon to help you out. And then at night, it's just so crucial that people try as best they can to limit their exposure to blue light and to bright light. Something I didn't realize about light exposure early in the morning is that it has a mitigating effect to the exposure to blue light at night, which I didn't realize, which is
yeah, so we talked about circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle with Nick Littlehales a few episodes ago. And I tell you, I wish I knew half of what I know now about sleep. It would have made a difference as a junior doctor, I've no doubt.
Oh, we know it now. We know it now. And you know what, Cheryl? This is a beautiful thing about yoga. It's there for you. It's there for you always. It doesn't matter when you start, just so long as you start. And it's always going to be up and down. You'll have days and weeks where your practice is really strong and really regular, and other days or weeks where the last thing you want to do is roll out your mat, and that's okay. It's there for you when you decide to pick it up again.
Yeah, and personally, I respect you so much, Dominique, because you make this accessible and safe. This podcast series has featured people like yourselves who are experts in their respective fields, but I think more than that, you're all unique in that you constantly challenge the status quo, you question and you adapt based on emerging information and evidence. You and Melanie have put so much work into the AYA teacher program, and the body of science, and trying to marry that with ancient wisdom and applying it to a modern day yoga practice is really impressive. I mean, there's so many examples and areas that are currently very interesting. Skeletal variance and the role of fascia in asana, for example, neuroplasticity, energy flows where intention and attention goes. And then we've got the ideas of polyvagal theory and breath and, heart rate variability and how that can improve with yoga practice, and in all its components and dimensions. So that I think these are going to be areas that are going to be really exciting to watch in the coming years.
Heart rate variability is, that's all linked into vagal tone and resilience. And it's just, like I said, it's such an exciting time to be studying and learning, because it's, back when I started nearly 25 years ago, you just took your teacher's word, and there was a lot of trust that you just had to give your teacher in the practice. But now we've got the science to back it up, and it makes it really, really exciting.
Well, I am certainly very grateful to have met a teacher who continually challenges me and makes me question everything. I thank you so much for sharing your time. I hope that you will come on again, because there are so many areas so many rabbit holes that we could go down together.
Oh, well, thank you. I don't know that I can take credit for anything at all. Like I said, I'm just trying to keep myself out of prison. Cheryl, it's I'm happy to come on anytime. I find you really easy to talk to. I consider you a friend and a colleague, a fellow traveller on this path. And I think that one of the most empowering things that we can do right now is to use whatever skills we have to contribute in a positive way, because that's going to give us a sense of control and a sense of meaning. And everyone has something to offer. Everyone
Yes.
has something to offer, especially what they're offering in terms of how are you taking responsibility for yourself right now. Bringing this full circle back to how we started this conversation. Not everyone has a skill set that they may see as valuable, but the way that you set your sankalpa, your intention for the day, the way that you take control of yourself and your life and try to really stay vigilant of being responsive rather than reactive, that's the single most beneficial thing we can do as behavioural modelling for our kids, in terms of just taking the reins of responsibility for ourselves, and ultimately that's what the work of yoga is. How are you with you, and then everything else falls into place. So it's actually been a real honor chatting to you, Cheryl. And
Thanks for taking the time.
oh, anytime. For you, I've got hours and days.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dominique as much as I did. I'll put a link in the show notes to a couple of videos that Dominique and her team at AYA have produced, which demonstrate some short, accessible breathing exercises and techniques that she's described here. And I really encourage you to check them out and have a practice. As she says herself, the proof is in the practice. And I should at this point say the only caution and caveat to that is that although the majority of these practices are safe and accessible for most people, if you're in any doubt about your ability or safety of your ability to practice these, you should consult your doctor. This podcast is not about providing medical advice. It's about sharing expertise, experience and ideas. And, the same applies to the online yoga platform at the moment. It's no substitute for having a teacher in the room with you physically. You can injure yourself, and I'm not condoning any extreme breath practices or any extreme asana. It's about taking responsibility for yourself ultimately. And if you get an opportunity to practice in a class with a teacher like Dominique, then that should be the aim on the other side of this pandemic. And I'm going to have another crack at some Sanskrit since I've been messing that up all through this episode. But in the Yoga Sutras, they describe this idea of the chitta vritti nirodha, and I just love that. So yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind, and we are all very much deep in it, as we've discussed at the beginning of this, and it's so hard to switch off, to check out, and breath work is an access to that. And I love the way that many of my guests here have these subtle interconnections. So I found this another beautiful quote that I'd like to finish on, that is by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. And if you remember, my guest, Dr. Zun Vo, from 2 episodes ago, had trained under Thich Nhat Hanh in mindfulness. And he says that, or encourages us to breathe in deeply and bring our minds home to our bodies. I'll leave you with that, and I hope there was something useful in this for you today. I look forward to joining you again next time. And I think that one of the most
empowering things that we can do right now is to use whatever skills we have to contribute in a positive way, because that's going to give us a sense of control and a sense of meaning and
The MBA New South Wales ACT does wonderful work for those of our colleagues who are, at this very minute, experiencing a hard time. One way you can show you care about doctors' welfare is to go to their website, www.mbansw.org.au, and donate today. Knowing that their colleagues' care is a big part of these doctors' recovery, so please be part of the solution. All donations are tax deductible. If you can, please consider a monthly donation, as even small amounts collectively will allow them to plan their growth to support the increased demand.